Hi everyone, you're listening in to What's Going On, a podcast where we have important, relevant, and sometimes difficult conversations to inspire you to start having your own. In today's episode, we're talking cultural appropriation. As we explore the differences between appreciating and co-opting one's culture, I would like us to remember the ways indigenous traditions and customs have been appropriated in our lives. What's Going On is by Suffolk University's Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion in Boston, Massachusetts. Hence, we would like to honor the Mashpee Wampanoag, Akina Wampanoag, Nipmuc, and Massachusetts tribal nations whom this land originally belonged. It's imperative to acknowledge the Massachusetts tribe, who historically lived in areas that make up present-day Greater Boston. It has come time for us to think about the appropriation we have inflicted upon the indigenous community, people whose land was forcefully taken away and culture nearly eradicated. We honor the diverse tribes, people, and respect the connection to this land. To know more about the land you are on and ways you can support the indigenous community, please visit www.native-land.ca, and for those of us in Massachusetts, maindigenousagenda.org. And with that, I will welcome my guest speaker for today, photographer and retoucher from the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, Ava Williams.
Hi, I'm Ava Williams. My pronouns are she, her, and I work in the fashion industry.
So Ava, let's jump right in, I guess. So this weekend it's Halloween. So as we both know that during Halloween, one of the signature things about the event or the day is that we would all dress up in different costumes, and almost like, I know that in schools here you all do Spirit Week, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost similar to that. So will you tell us what's going on with Halloween and what's the problem? What has been popping up recently?
Well, the problem with Halloween is that as we have grown up in a more knowledge-based society and with a lot of resources, everyone's sort of learning about what isn't okay to dress, like what you shouldn't be wearing. And it is a issue because a lot of the costumes that are problematic, we've all worn in our past before we knew they were an issue. And a lot of people are sort of getting defensive about why you shouldn't wear these costumes. And I guess that we have to, like, as a society, just come to understand that, like, while Halloween is this like fun thing, you're not meaning any harm. Just because you don't mean it doesn't mean you're not harming someone by dressing in their culture and sort of making a stereotype out of the costume you're wearing, which is a huge issue because in every Halloween store you go into, there's like dozens of costumes that aren't okay. So you have to just do the proper research before Halloween to ensure that you're not participating in something without your knowledge.
That's informative. So what do you think, can you give some examples of Halloween costumes, quote unquote, that is culturally appropriating?
One Halloween costume that became quite popular was going as a geisha girl, or like you go as like Pocahontas. A lot of the Disney princesses would probably not be suitable for a lot of people because they do call upon a ton of stereotypes. I wouldn't, and there's also like costumes of being like a terrorist, which is like super problematic. I don't even know how those even exist, because in America we went through a huge terrorist attack that shapes our society and the rest of the world, and to call upon that sort of stereotype that had like plagued America and caused a lot of hate for a lot of people is sort of insane. So like a lot of those costumes that you see, even like witches are not totally politically correct, and anything, I guess, really that calls upon a culture that you're not a part of. You know, if you think about all the costumes that you've worn, when you think about like what made the costume what it is, you have to think about what it's calling upon to make that sort of to get the idea across. You know, like when you're a witch, you have like a mole or a big nose, and how does that play into sort of hate towards other people?
Yeah, and that's for sure. I think a lot of people would say that, oh, you're not dressing up as a terrorist or dressing up as a witch. It's not culturally appropriating. And we'll talk more about that, especially witches and pagans in a minute. But I also want to address and add that, especially when you mention geisha, I think other than culturally appropriating the Japanese culture, it also kind of puts the Asian community into like this whole stereotype, into like this monolith, right? That all Asians are the same. And as an Asian myself, I often run into the issue of people thinking that I'm Korean, and then people thinking that Koreans are Chinese and Japanese are Chinese, and they feel like our culture is all the same. There may be differences, but it's the same. But for us who are in that culture, who identify as an Asian, specifically as a Chinese or Japanese or Korean or Vietnamese or Cambodian, um, it's almost kind of like insulting, right, to our culture, because we take pride in our culture. And so let's move to the next part of talking about witches. Like you mentioned, a mole, a big nose, a pointy head, and mostly almost like ugly,
Yeah,
right? Not physically appealing. And where do you think that archetype came from?
I think it probably came from the misconception about what witches were, right? So, a lot of the time, witches were just witches. If you know, like when you think about a witch, you think about like, you know, we've all seen Hocus Pocus. Like, there's like people that are like out to do bad things and cast spells on people that causes them to turn into whatever, you know. But that's not necessarily the truth. You know, like witches were sort of just another spiritual group that were trying to like be healers and use different methods of healing, and sort of just believing in their own sort of religion. It was like it was how they practiced. But it became this super misconstrued thing because I think Christianity tried to like overpower any other religion that wasn't Christianity, you know, and any religion that didn't really believe in one singular God or God at all, you know. So to cast like a shadow over witches, you know, kind of spoke out against them. And then obviously the witch trials came, and witches were made out to be these really terrible people. They were killed for practicing what they believed, you know. So I think it just became this big thing because of the way, you know, like the church and Christianity and everyone sort of spewed against them. It, over time, turned into this whole hate towards them, which caused the stereotypes that you'd see now to form into a more what people laugh at, but is actually quite hurtful.
Yeah, I was actually talking to my school's in like the person in the interfaith center called Reverend Amy Fisher, and she was actually talking to me and telling me about how witches are actually like the image of witches are put onto pagans who actually I forgot which language it was, but in another language it actually just means a country dweller. They weren't originally a religion, and how people actually think of them as witches or as people who can curse on or put a hex on somebody. And I just want to read this. So I actually I did some research, and I found this from JSTOR, which is a digital library which used to publish only academic journals, and now they've published like other books and stuff. And together with JSTOR and also Suffolk University's interfaith webpage, I was actually educated on Halloween quite a bit. So Halloween is actually a secular holiday, so to speak, but it came from this pagan weekend holiday called the Samhain, and it's a Celtic festival of the day, which is almost like the Mexicans' Day of the Day, that honors ancestors and marks the new year for them. And while Halloween is mostly known to be secular, Halloween in the States specifically, which is interesting, is shaped by our country's own harvest season and early European settlers' well-known fear of witches, which is like you mentioned, right? That they're evil, and also customs that are brought by the 19th century Irish immigrants. And I find that interesting because it seems like there's a lot of mix to it. Like Halloween used to be this event and this holiday that kind of like it's more of appreciating the holiday, the pagan weekend holiday of Samhain. And then when it came to the States, it kind of got shifted and changed into like putting witches into the mix, and then wearing costume to kind of like ward off evil, right? And I think the next part is interesting, whereby Christians associated the Celtic supernatural phenomenon with evil, defining fairies as fallen angels, which are the devils, and then branding followers of the old religion as witches, which are followers of the devil. And um, do you know that before you came in here, and what are your thoughts about how different religions kind of appropriate one another, if you will?
I took a class sort of talked about all this, but it is kind of, all of it makes sense to me, just in the sense that like it seems like something that would have happened, because of the way religion controls our society even today. So like, to think that like when someone does, like when you think about the way religions will act towards someone who doesn't agree with them, it's not always totally the most polite or politically correct way to go about sort of settling the disagreements. Instead of like believing that someone could believe something else, they automatically want to change your opinion. So in order to change your opinion, you kind of cast the over someone else, saying sort of the things that will scare them into believing that you are correct. So the fact that that happened is not shocking, and the fact that it still sort of is true today is quite sad. That this is sort of, we still believe, like the things that hurt people so long ago are the things we still believe today.
Yeah, and when we think about religion, right? Like America takes pride in the freedom of religion. And while today we're talking specifically about cultural appropriation, I think we can see from the politics that we have today that religion is used a lot as a reason for certain way of being, and even certain laws and certain movements. And I think it's worth thinking about for our audience and ourselves, if um, our religion really preaches that, if what we believe in as the perfect way of being, or being the great person or good person, um, if that means getting people to also believe your religion, right? And that's what also we see with Halloween. Um, and this is something like less serious, but I also find it really intriguing, is that so we all know Jack-o'-lantern, another signature of Halloween. It's actually a real person, or was actually a real person. So the Jack-o'-lantern was inspired by a blacksmith named Jack, who according to folklore was too evil to go to heaven, and so he continued to stay on earth. And that's how the Jack-o'-lantern came about. And um I want to know, what are your thoughts about this kind of like folklore turned into like a signature? It's a do you think it's a commemoration? Do you think it's an appreciation of a certain culture, or do you think it's something that people feel like, oh, it's for fun, so I'm gonna pick it, and then I like it, so I'm gonna turn it into a hallmark of an event, of a holiday?
I think people like lose the actual meaning of things so quickly that it there is no celebrating it. It's just doing, like, it's just a tradition. There, like, I didn't know that obviously about jack-o'-lanterns. Um, I think people so quickly like forget the actual meaning behind things, and obviously, like if you're not told it or you're not taught these legends or folklore, it's lost over time, and unless it's documented, you're never gonna know. And so I think the way we treat these traditions and these things can be harmful to the people who do know these things, that do know the information. And it can, I think, in any sense, even if it is just for fun, if there's a harmful connotation behind it, then it's not really celebrating anything. It's sort of celebrating hate, which shouldn't be done at all. So I think while carving pumpkins, having a jack-o'-lantern is a staple of Halloween, when the history behind it is from something that could be hateful or racist or any sort of thing like that, it shouldn't be done, period. Because as much as we might change it now, if people know, like, or if people feel that there's still, if there's still mass hate in the world, then there's going to be people who do it out of hate.
Yeah, we see that, and specifically and especially for people who are still believers in or practitioners of pagan, right? Like who are pagans actually. So because they are so, like, their religion is so synonymous with being witches, that a lot of them actually don't in a way come out. They don't identify themselves as pagans walking among us because of such negative connotations. And why I say that is also because I think a lot of people, when they wear certain things or when they do certain actions, they feel like it's harmless. And while they know that they're perpetuating a negative stereotype, they still feel like, I'm not doing anything harmful. Like the person or people who are in that community didn't get hurt. But this is like a message out there to the audience to like really think twice about what we do in our daily lives, which is actually our next topic. So cultural appropriation doesn't just happen during Halloween, it happens in our daily lives too. So as a photographer and also mainly in arts and fashion, tell us a little bit more about if that happens in the industry and how, and maybe even your personal experiences with that.
It absolutely happens. I hate to say it, but probably every day, like there's a scandal all the time that you read about with Vogue or models on Instagram, especially with social media. It's more widely known. And I think the issue with it, not just the fact that it's terrible that these things happen, is that people feel so indifferent about it when they're the ones practicing it. So when you take things like, when you go on social media and you see all these trends, like, I know I've talked about it before, but like you go on TikTok and there's a fox eye trend and they're doing, or like the migraine pose, because Kendall Jenner or Bella Hadid did that sort of makeup. You get lost in the fact that it can be so harmful to someone who is seeing it and probably is made fun of for the shape of their eye, and now white people are doing it and it becomes this whole beautiful thing that is worshipped all over and articles are done about it, when in fact for so long people were made fun of for having like a fox eye, what did basically rebranding a whole culture's eye shape that they probably at some point were made fun of. I mean, I've had this conversation with my roommate too. She went to like a private school in England, and she was the only Korean person, and she basically couldn't count how many times she was made fun of for her eye shape, right? So the fact that like a model does it now who's white and rich and it becomes this whole big trend is so sad, because people do it and they don't realize it, and it becomes this whole thing, this beauty standard that people were told that was so ugly before, and it happens so frequently. And obviously, like, the people are told not to do this, right? But they continue to do it. You see it every single day. I'm a retoucher, so I look at those Photoshop mistakes, right, all the time, and you can see the difference between the picture that the model has posted and the picture that the brand has posted, and they have edited their eyes to look like to kind of turn up, and it's like what isn't clicking about the fact that that is a terrible thing to do. Like, we have told you, there has been news articles, there is no not knowing anymore. when you post something like that, and just because you have fans or whatever that block out all the information doesn't mean that you're unaware, because we're living in this age where you're told everything right away, and the scandals get told to your agents or whatever. So all this information is being brought to you, and you're still making these mistakes, which is how you kind of like lose your sort of idleness from people, because they're failing to correct their mistakes.
I think it's definitely important for you to mention Fox Eye trend, because for me, even honestly as an Asian, when I saw, I think what's her Bella Hadid, I think was the one that kind of made this popular, where I saw a magazine article about the Fox Eye trend, and they were like, how to achieve this lifted eye look, just like Bella Hadid. And at the same time, I'm like, hang on, this looks a little like what people are always making fun of, like my eyes, like they're stunted. They will always say it's a slit, right? Slit eye, and then it turned to a Fox Eye trend, and suddenly white people are wearing it, and the world goes wild over it. And the same thing we see with blackfishing, where do you want to talk more about blackfishing?
Yeah, I mean, you see it a lot now, especially with the normalization of sort of blackface, basically. You see like white people doing spray tans and stuff, and it's just too dark. It's too dark. It's not naturally what their skin tone is. And I'm someone who gets quite tan, but even the tan that they do, is so dark. I'd have to probably sit out in the sun 24/7 all summer long in order to achieve that glow that they have. And it's just the idea that they don't know what they're doing is sort of not believable. You have to understand, like, think about like when people were people were literally killed for their skin, for the color of their skin, and the fact that you're now idolizing it or becoming tan to sort of, it's like a mockery of all the things that have happened to move forward. It is a more modern blackface that is widely accepted among influencers, models, everything. And I mean, when I go to school and I learned how to edit photos, like you're not explicitly told all these things, right? You have to learn them yourself, but you're never supposed to darken or lighten someone's skin. So the fact that these things happen like you do it unnaturally over the winter, and to stay tan and to not look so white, like that is the whole purpose, to not be as pale as you are. The fact that you don't see anything wrong with that is kind of shocking to me, because it is now, especially now that it's so normalized. I mean, fake tan is so apparent in everything. You see it all over Instagram, and filters that darken people's skin. It's unbelievable that these things are you're basically doing blackface and getting away with it.
Yeah, and sometimes I think of my black peers, and I cannot help but imagine almost like the rage that they have, like you said, they are literally targeted for their skin color, and yet the Kardashians and celebrities like Ariana Grande fake tans their skin in such a way that makes them attractive. And also same with fashion, like you mentioned. I remember watching a video of a runway by Moschino, I think that's it's pronounced. Yeah. They have like gold chains and like hip hop, and they call it streetwear, but really, they look at black people wear that, and they say all the bad things, and then one moment a fashion brand just adopts that, make it a little bit more in vogue, and people buy it. And I think that's crazy. Same with hip hop, same with rap. So let's go on to talking about specifically how after not after, it's still not done, but once the uprising happened earlier this year, a lot of brands are starting to try to appreciate Black culture, and so what would you say is the difference between appropriation and appreciation?
I think to appreciate a culture, right, you have to bring in it is more than just having a model from the culture, right? Like it is more like I've been on sets before, and luckily, I mean, I've never been on a set, to my knowledge, at least, that has kind of been this whole big to do culture appropriation or been caught in a scandal. But when you bring, like, I've been on sets where you bring on a model, right, with a, and you're trying to accentuate the culture they're from, right, to appreciate it. But at times it can be so overwhelming. You know, you're like, you're calling upon every single stereotype to like drill in the fact that they are this culture. But one, like this model is a person, you know, they're more than the culture, of course, to celebrate that culture. But you don't have to expect this model to carry an entire culture in one photo shoot. And I think the issue comes especially with the fact that, yeah, you're putting a model, like say you're putting a black model on the cover of a magazine, but when you look behind the scenes, is every single person behind the scenes white? You know, you have to, it's more than the model, it's more than the face of the brand, it's more than the people you're using. Of course, that is a huge thing. You don't want just white models or whatever you're doing. You don't want just the face, like every, you know, like the Oscars so widely known for not having any black nominees. You don't want just the faces of the people to be uh, uh, diverse. You want the whole team to be diverse. Makeup artists, assistants, photographers, retouchers. You want to ensure that everyone behind the scenes understands as well. And I think in order to really fix our society to ensure that we're not um, kind of making these mistakes, you have to employ these people to ensure that uh, you know, you're appreciating a culture instead of appropriating it. Because if there's, you know, 20 white people behind the scenes kind of putting together a series of images on black culture, there is a million things wrong with that statement, and yet it happens every day. So you have to employ more people of color and sort of think about what you're to help think about what you're doing. And it is obviously it is like my responsibility as a photographer to know how to edit a certain skin tone, all skin tones, not certain, all skin tones, and to ensure, like, it's my job to learn these things, but it's also everyone else's job to learn how to appreciate culture and not expect, like, because you're employing more diverse people, that they're going to teach you what is right and what is wrong. So I think that, like, it all, like, to appreciate culture, you have to sort of take it under your own wing and kind of, it's like research it yourself, research what you're doing, um, and then let someone else take over, right? Because this is, you're not supposed to, you can't, you shouldn't get capitalistic gain over someone else, right? As a white person. So I think you have to um, sort of like know your place and sort of give up the control and, you know, let someone else take it away for a while. Because I mean, obviously white people have had control for quite some time.
Yeah, and institutionalized and structural racism is still a thing, right? And so, my question, since you talk about the industry, would be, as a white person, um, how do you ensure? Because you mentioned that as a photographer, you need to, it's necessary for you to learn how to edit all skin tones. And so, as a white person, how do you um, make sure that it's kind of like an ironic question. So, how do you make sure that your unconscious bias doesn't affect um, your work?
I think it's about really just thinking about what you're doing, right? So like when I'm editing someone, right, and if they're black, I think about what naturally accentuates black skin tones, or uh, sort of like the lighting, and you're thinking about naturally what they look like in person, right? And of course, when you're editing photos, like color comes into play, and you're when you're kind of going in and putting your own spin on it, because like art is that way. You have to think about if your eye is actually hurting the image, right? So when you're editing, just making sure, like thinking twice before you go into your normal routine. So like every person's different, so every person needs a different sort of edit, and thinking past what is aesthetically pleasing to you and what actually makes someone look their best, quote, So obviously, everyone looks perfect the way they are. So making sure that you're not changing that, and like, so not bringing the exposure down on someone's skin tone unless you overexposed it and it looks like that you've lightened their features, which isn't okay, and not like desaturating their skin tone to make it less, vibrant. That's super important not to do. And sort of picking, like knowing color theory, knowing what works well with what skin tones, and accentuating that. And I think it's just really about knowing what you're doing first off, like going in and doing the work, and then not expecting someone else to do it for you, not expecting that if you make a mistake, it's okay. Of course, it's fine to make a mistake, but you have to put the work into, like, it has to be an honest mistake. It has to be something that you've done unknowingly, not just out of laziness. Sort of making the changes when, and acknowledging your mistakes, so that you don't make them in the future, and then kind of looking at other images of where people went right, obviously. So just research, I think, and thinking about what you're doing past the end result, thinking about the reaction and how the person in the images and what you're doing feels about it, making sure that their feelings are taken into account.
That's actually very insightful. And following from that, educate us, me and the audience, a little bit about who's in charge in the idea. Because what happens with cultural appropriation oftentimes, or at least from my view as a consumer, is that, oh, like this company comes up with this idea and you as a photographer just shoots the photo. But from your point of view, as someone who is experienced in the industry, who actually is in charge? Is in charge of the idea, and who gets a say?
Usually it's like, so obviously everyone gets a certain sort of say in what they're doing, right? But a creative director would have like a huge control. And I think if you're doing something and it doesn't feel right, like you're allowed to tell someone, right? It's your work. So one of the big things is like when you retouch, you think that as a, like when I'm editing photos, right? Like you might think that I am told what to do, so I do it, right? But like any type of art form, I have my own style of retouching. So if someone's like, oh, can you make this person skinnier? Then absolutely not. I'm not doing that. That's not what I do. So you have to sort of stand your ground. And when someone asks for your art, they're asking for your style, and you have to be strong enough to tell people that that's not something you're comfortable doing, and here are the reasons why. And and as much as it is hard to like sort of stand up for yourself, especially with someone in power above you, you have to be more willing to confront what is right and what's wrong. So obviously creative directors have a huge role in that. And it is obviously their job to know certain things and to not be defensive about their choices. But if something's going wrong as a photographer, you're taking a picture and the stylist comes out and it's like cultural appropriation, or like makeup artist has put like dreadlocks on a white model, you have to speak up, because if you know it's wrong, then everyone else should. And especially as a white person, I would have a lot of more power if as say like I had a black assistant who was behind the scenes and saw it and didn't feel comfortable because I'm the photographer and they're not in charge. It's your job to take a stand and tell people at any stage, whoever they are, what's wrong with that. Because often if you stand up, other people will stand up too. And if you're the only one standing up, then maybe that's not the job you want to work for, right? So then you're out of a job that would be, for starters, bad for you to do anyways, but you're not sort of attached to this hate. So I think it, if someone's not willing to change, then you shouldn't be willing to work for them.
That's a good point. That's a good point that I personally came to a realization recently too. As you can see, I have purple hair, and it's more than just fun for me. It's part of my identity, and people often ask, "Oh my gosh, how are you gonna get a job? You're a senior. What are you gonna do?" And I'm like, "Well, if a company's gonna base my professionalism on my purple hair, then it's not a place I want to work at." So it's kind of like assuring to hear that, and it's something similar from you. And you mentioned also some of your frustrations with the industry right now too, right? Um, the with the industry being like dominantly white, and white folks trying to, sometimes with good intentions, um, try to display culture by appropriating it. So what um what would you say as consumers, what can we do? Because I feel like a lot of times, at least from what I see, I follow accounts like Estee Laundry and things like that, oftentimes it's either consumers boycott their brand, like not buying them, or employees come out, create an Instagram account and be like, this is our grievances, we've done this and that, and the company is not listening to us. They start again a following, and the companies start to listen. And so I guess it's a two-part question. First is, do you think that works? And second is, if yes, should consumers and employees continue doing that? If no, what ways do you see, as a photographer and as a person in the industry, what ways do you see that people can shift and effect change?
I think the answer to like boycott stuff is both yes and no, because like I was a huge fan of Glossier. It was my go-to makeup brand, and recently they came under fire, and immediately unfollow, unfollow. I bought nothing again, right? Until they fix their sort of the way they work, right? I'm not gonna support them. And at the same time, that brought attention to Glossier, right? And they posted about it, and it was like, okay, well, that seems good, right? But then you have the account that's behind the scenes saying none of the things that they're saying are really going through. So while it did bring attention to it, it can bring this false sort of assurance that things are being done, and it brings consumers back towards that that brand. But I think sort of when when a brand you like is being called out, don't like the CEO, everyone's going to get tons of money no matter what, right? There's always going to be someone who doesn't know what's going on. There's always going to be someone who says, well, maybe if I just buy this one thing. But try and see it from like the lower people on the lower people, right? So like when you go shopping, think about the person you're coming in contact with, the cashier or the retail worker who's helping you figure out what you need. Think about how hard they might be working to get such a small sum, and the CEOs like sort of just ignoring the fact that they have created an unsafe environment, and that these people are forced to work in it because we live in a consumer society and we need money to exist in the world. And there's college students racking up thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, right? So you need to have a job in order to sort of pay that way. And just because a Black person works at a brand doesn't necessarily mean it's good. I mean, I worked at Urban Outfitters, and they are a terrible company, but it's the only place that would hire me. I didn't support their company, right? You have to take a stand against, and you have to stick through it. So as soon as you come across information that brings to light that a brand you're using isn't good, stop using it. Just stop using it. Like it, in the long run, it might not bankrupt the people, because that's sort of how like life doesn't really work that way. But it also brings attention to the fact that like you're supporting, it's not really about, it would be great if it was about bankrupting them, right? Like bad people suddenly are super poor. But it's more about supporting the people who get hurt because of this brand. So I don't shop from Amazon because the factory workers who are putting that package together for me are in dangerous environments, and I don't want to support that. And I don't and like I recently learned, I think it was L'Oreal, um, tests on animals or something like that. I stopped using L'Oreal, right? Like as soon as you find out something bad, there is no question, you just stop. And that sort of helps. And then you inform other people, right? So like I know people who love Glossier. I texted every single person I know saying, stop shopping at Glossier. I I have right here a water bottle that's Glossier that I do not take out in public. I have it, I bought it beforehand, but I'm not going to be a walking billboard for people who hate. So I guess sort of while there are things you can do, like boycotting helps, it doesn't stop the brand from existing, but it helps the people who are being hurt because of it, showing your support. So shop small, shop local, there are a million resources now that show like dupes of things that you might love. So I guess just sort of trying harder to be more aware and to work harder to find different ways, and sort of like sacrificing the comfort of, yeah, it would be great to get a package in 2 days from Amazon, but do I really want to hurt someone in the process? And also, is it environmentally friendly to do such a thing? Like thinking about everything you're doing and sort of like giving up the comfort you get from it.
For sure. That reminds me of like a recent, I haven't even heard of the brand, but kind of like just a caveat with local business shopping. I think there was a local store and they were selling like slave earrings. And I think the interesting thing is people call them out, and the owner, who is white, was saying that, oh, I understand where you're coming from, but we researched it, and the name of the earring is actually appropriately named. So basically, don't come for us. And it's so cringe worthy, that again, I guess that person, I'm gonna go with like that person has good intent. At the same time, impact over intent, right? And I think he also gave a really good perspective towards um, people who are hesitant to boycott brands because, like you mentioned, the cashiers, the store, the retail associates, they are mostly either people of color or people with low income, or like in the economic, not as a great economic standing. And so like if we boycott them, what happens to them, right? But at the same time, if we in that way really put our money where our mouth is and take action through our spending, that will direct people to a better direction. And also for those who work there, they're still getting paid. And I'm sure once they hear of those things that's happening, if it hasn't happened to them yet, I'm pretty sure they will be finding other jobs. And not to say that their lives are not important, but again, I think it's a complicated issue, and it's definitely a perfect balance. And I really appreciate you bringing that perspective in for those who are listening and are kind of like on the fence about having information about some brands unethical ways, but is hesitant to kind of stop buying their products. So moving back to more specifically the impacts of cultural appropriation, when you mention like geisha and terrorists, it also brings me reminds me of this issue of like fetishization and sexism, right? Where especially for people who fetishizes Asians and Asian features, there's this thing called yellow fever, right? And how it kind of translate through, for example, like costumes for Halloween in geisha is that they're often very sexy, and like kimonos are very thin for some reason, even though kimonos technically have, I think, at least 5 layers. So how do you, as you mentioned, some frustrations as a photographer, but as an individual, how do you see that fetishization and sexism in cultural appropriation come through?
I think the most terrible thing is the fact that like every single, like when you're in college isn't the thing to go as like something sexy for whatever, like whatever costume you're going. And I think obviously to make money, people are making these costumes, and it's really a terrible thing because they're not thinking about the way that sort of makes a culture, makes fun of a culture, and creates like a very like a just a bad rep for something that uh, so many people have celebrated for their whole life. It sort of makes a joke out of a culture. And I think, you see like short skirts for whatever, or like, like someone goes as Princess Jasmine and they're barely wearing any clothes, right? It's like you have to think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how can you better apply yourself. Like it obviously, like one of the biggest stereotypes is going as a schoolgirl, right? So like what is wrong with going as a schoolgirl? Nothing. But what is wrong with it going as like a sexy geisha girl? Well, let's think about that for just more than a split second. Geisha girl, being a geisha girl is about like there's this whole cultural celebration behind it that you probably know nothing about, and you're just trying to look your best, right? So how can you apply yourself in different ways? And I think you see it in revealing tops or really short skirts and basically wearing no clothes. I mean, was it in Mean Girls they say that like you put on a piece of lingerie and then you put like animal ears on and then you're whatever. Yeah, I'd love to go back to that so that we weren't like taking cultures and trying basically making a joke about it. So I guess try, like you see it all the time, but in order to sort of fix that, you just literally have to think about it more than 1 second. And you have to don't think about like what makes you look the best. Think about like how it affects the people around you, and how like creating a safe space for certain people. And if you do something wrong, acknowledging it instead of ignoring it, and trying to fix it instead of trying to cover it up and make excuses for it.
For sure, yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with dressing up as Britney Spears. You know, I mean, when you mentioned schoolgirl, it reminds me of her MV. Nothing wrong as like me dressing up as like Wednesday Addams. You know, they are all movie characters, but when you dress up as somebody from another culture, it's worth thinking about. I mean, I honestly, quite frankly, you know, after what happened to Justin Trudeau, I think about my social media all the time, a lot, because in Singapore, we have this day called Racial Harmony where we actually swap our traditional wear with people of different races and wear them kind of like as a show of like solidarity. And so, kind of bringing back the whole like your intent and your impact has to kind of match, right? If your impact is more negative than your intent, then like it defeats the purpose. Because yeah, like there's no benefit in making fun of another person's culture and to make people feel unsafe. And we also talk about how um people like Kardashians and Ariana Grande, how they blackfish and things like that. So talk a little bit about whitewashing.
Um, so whitewashing is terrible, and I think about it all the time because I photograph, right? And in the current state, I cannot come in contact with a ton of people. So when I get a job, right, and I want to photograph someone, I think about, or photograph something, I think about the fact that it could come out really terrible. Like my intention could not be to just use white models, but if I only have my sister or my roommates, right, like how does that come across people? So I think whitewashing is basically, like taking something, take like, like in the case of Scarlett Johansson, which is super, super well known, she in Ghost in the Shell or whatever
Yeah,
the,
Ghost in the Shell.
yeah,
Yeah.
she plays an Asian person. I'm not quite sure, but she, and she says, "Oh, I should be able to play a tree." It's like that's actually not how it works. Like you can play a tree, but you can't play a black person. That is sort of the basic rule, and we know this because when you're trying out for something, think about when Ariel was announced, the live action Ariel, and there's going to be a black Ariel. The uproar, a black person can simply not play what is widely known as a white person. So why is it any different, right? So you cannot play, you cannot make something. You can't take a white person and put them in a person of color's role, and you have to think about what that sort of says to someone, because everyone needs someone to look up to, right? Like, think about all the Disney princesses, a lot of them are white. Like, I definitely had my fair share of people to look up to, but like obviously a black princess just came about, and she played, I'm pretty sure in it she's a frog for most of it. So I guess with whitewashing, you just have to think about how, like, who is right for the role, who is right to play a black person. A black person has a right to play a black person. So thinking about that, thinking about the way you're portraying a character, obviously, like, a black person can play a white person, like in the sense of Ariel, because white people have not been oppressed. Like, I'm pretty sure Ariel was not discriminated against, so, for the color of her skin. So um, thinking about what is hurting, what is helping again, and just trying, like, being diverse, but not sort of overpowering a person of color's voice with a white person, because obviously a white person like Scarlett Johansson doesn't know what it's like to be an Asian woman, and even if you are culturally aware of things and you understand what's happened to people of color, you will never, like, as a white person, will never be a person of color, and you will never experience that, and you will never be scared for your life or to be discriminated against. So you should at least let the people have their voice and let them be seen, because a lot of the time they are not.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I was just laughing because Ghost in the Shell, yeah, it's a very popular anime, which is like a Japanese anime. And when they released the poster for Ghost in the Shell, it was Scarlett Johansson, and a lot of people were confused. I know several people were kind of like roasting kind of things like that. And that's when she came out, right, with the article of like, as an actress, I can be whoever I want, I can be a tree if I want. And again, she probably meant it another way, but with the impact that she has, that's very unnecessary. And also with Disney, even though they have Aladdin and Mulan, um, I believe, okay, I didn't research these, but given the year and the time when they were created, it was probably by white folks. It was probably drawn and studied by white folks. And um, to me, again, cultural appropriation has this aspect of subjectiveness, but to me, I feel like that's very, I would say, crosses the borderline of appreciation into appropriation, because they definitely got some cultures and like historical aspects of the Chinese culture right for Mulan, but it wasn't, it was very stereotyped, and especially also with Mulan's eyes, right? Like we see that, like the fox eye, if you want to call it. And so let's tie it all together and kind of like we didn't really address this expressively, but what do you think is the relationship between cultural appropriation and white supremacy and racism? Do you even think there's a link?
I think there is. I think culture appropriation often calls upon stereotypes and basically makes a mockery of them, or is repackaged to be capitalized upon by white people. Um, like, certain things are like, if I as a white person would never sell sort of like an indigenous, like I wouldn't sell a dream catcher, right? Because um, I am not from a culture that celebrates dream catchers, or but that is a why, like, in the past people made dream catchers at camp, and I think like the term spirit animal isn't really used. It's a stereotype that indigenous people use, right? But it's not really something that they actually like, or I can't speak for all of them, right? I'm white, so, but they appreciate animals, right, in a certain respect to the nature and um, sort of the world and earth. And it's not necessarily having a spirit animal, but that appreciation and understanding of animals. So obviously the term spirit animal, like when someone says like wine is my spirit animal, like that's already just like, again, like you're just making a mockery of something that doesn't really exist in their culture, but plays down their culture as well, which is just like a double hit, right? So I think white supremacy sort of, it takes like Eurocentric ideals and then makes anything that isn't that a mockery of certain cultures. So again, like fox eye, like rebranding that's culture appropriation. That is, you know, taking something that isn't yours and making it beautiful because a white person does it. That is a certain type of hate that is so harmful because people think that they're appreciating something when in fact they're not. So I think white supremacy and all that is sort of the underlying foundation for culture appropriation, because again, you're valuing white outlooks on certain cultures um, that have like repackaged it to be more accepting. And obviously, like if I did the fox eye, no one would ever make fun of me because I have done it and I'm white, and it's acceptable for a white person basically to do anything. So I think white supremacy, these Eurocentric ideas, kind of are the foundation for cultural appropriation. And any stereotype, anything like that, can never really be an appreciation of something. It's always appropriation.
For sure. And before we end off, so we always wanted to end off with like how can we as individuals effect change on the topics that we talk about. So we talk about how as a photographer you can stand up and speak against any of such practices. And so how about as individuals, what is your advice to the audience who perhaps have friends who are doing things that or say things like spirit animals that are culturally appropriating? Like what would be your advice on how they can speak to their friends, or actually what would you advise them to do?
I would say like I'm not perfect, right? So I made plenty of mistakes in my life. Like I didn't know spirit animal was like if I was saying it was bad or stuff like that. So I think when you hear it, gently acknowledge to someone, especially as a like if you are white, a white person will probably more accept your response towards it more than you know, like the actual person whose culture you're appropriating. So as long as like I would say go to your friends, tell them, have the conversations with them, tell them why it's bad, do the research, help them do the research because it's not anyone else's job really to sort of inform them, tell them why it's bad, and kind of help them come to that understanding. And obviously, again, like mistakes are made, and they're as much as that, like you're trying to create a safe space for someone. If you don't, um, just because your intention was not to hurt them doesn't mean you didn't. So acknowledging that your mistake instead of brushing it under the rug, but also at the same time not making this huge to do about it, just working on it for yourself. And I guess when you see something like that going on, just politely and calmly telling someone why it's bad and trying to diffuse the situation so that it remains a more like a nurturing sort of uh, situation. And obviously, someone might want to scream at someone, right? You're not allowed to tell people how to feel. So letting if you've done something wrong, letting someone's feelings sort of like you can't dictate their feelings, so accepting their feelings and trying to learn from what you've done. And I guess sort of just informing people is the best way, and posting about it and having difficult conversations would be the best thing, and sort of researching for yourself. Don't just research just because you did something wrong, research because you want to know.
For real, yeah, that's a great ending. Research not because you did something wrong, but because you really want to know and you want to learn and you want to be an ally to everybody. And just a reminder that allyship and activism is not an identity, it's not an action, it's something that is lifelong and something that you have to constantly work on. And also, we covered about the origins of Halloween and the archetypes of witches and why pagans are not necessarily witches and the negative association, and also cultural appropriation coming this weekend, and also in your everyday life. Look in your wardrobe, hear your own language, right? Are you adapting certain cultures and putting them into a stereotype? What are you wearing? What are you at the moment? What's in trend? And is that right for that to be in trend? And is that right for you to jump on that bandwagon? So thank you, Ava, for spending your time with us.
Of course.
You're listening to What's Going On, and I'll see you next week on a different topic. Take care.